Hello, everybody. Hello, Lavanya. How are you? And Anahi, great to see you. And Eric and Brian, of course. Thanks so much for joining, guys. This is great. Welcome,
Good
Bernie.
morning.
Lavanya, I think for whatever reason, you were listed first on the site. Are you okay to go first? Do you have any strong preference for that, Lavanya?
I just asked Anahi if it was okay if I could go first, given the time.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So,
Excellent.
It would be great.
So yeah, you guys worked that out already. Well done. So if that's okay, we'll just proceed along that route. And as a reminder, everybody, today's format, just a little bit different again, because we have two projects and two participants from our Ostrom Summer Academy. And the first one will be really, frankly, Lavanya, you did so much to make all of that happen. So first off, just thank you again for all the heavy lifting. It was just a wonderful, wonderful project that I look forward to continuing. Hopefully we can still get you here to Bloomington as well, sooner rather than later. But today, Lavanya, who is on the faculty as an assistant professor at the Hyderabad campus of BITS Pilani, and she has a PhD in political science and has a really robust background in this context. And she'll be presenting Understanding Polycentricity and Intersectionality in Small-Scale Irrigation Systems in Water-Stressed Regions of India. So really, really excited for this presentation, Lavanya. And then after that, we'll turn to Anahi, and we'll do our best to kind of split the time in half so you guys have roughly equal amounts here. So please, without further ado, Lavanya.
Thank you so much, Scott. And it was wonderful to be part of the planning process. And I really look forward to one day being able to actually come there physically. That's definitely in my to-do plan. So what I'm presenting today is a manuscript that has been giving me quite a bit of trouble. And I was very happy to get inputs from Harni on this. However, I've still not been able to take it forward beyond a point, and I'll explain that towards the end. So right now, I'll just present the work. So this particular, are you able to hear me? Yes?
Yes, we sure can. I'm going to turn up the volume just a little bit, though, because it's just a little quiet. There we go.
Thank you. So this paper starts with looking at the idea of scarcity. And Barbara Ross Johnson states that water scarcity not only reflects the relative aspects of supply and demand, but also the relative aspects of how water is valued, levels of access, patterns of use, and the relative degree of control over water resource governance and distribution. Thus, scarcity might reflect economic ability to pay for water, or the customs and social conditions and relations that privilege access to some while withholding it to other. Hence, we have the politics of water. Now, why does this matter and why do I engage with it? Leila Mehta, who works a lot on India, answers this question by stating that framing of water scarcity is very important. When we're thinking of how water scarcity is framed, we realize that modern economics, in most cases, ignores the multifaceted nature of water, and scarcity is often seen as coterminous with conflict rather than cases where conflict does not occur and instead we have cooperation. Now, scarcity is also not seen as a result of powerful actors getting away with resource appropriation and thus enhancing degradation. Leila also points out that scarcity is understood at the meta level in most cases, and hence technology is seen as a panacea, but small-scale solutions are equally important. In this paper, therefore, I link the politics of water with the socio-political perspectives that engage with discourse and alternative ways of managing the resource through more decentralized and indigenous efforts. In this paper, when I talk of alternatives, I basically mean initiatives that aim at the fundamental shift towards the core values of sustainability, equity, justice, and decentralization. This means people having a say in making decisions about the resource in question. This would also mean asking fundamental questions of who has power and who does not. So my research objectives, therefore, are to understand the actual alternative practice and how it differs from dominant discourse on irrigation, to analyze how just and inclusive such practices are to those who are advantaged or disadvantaged in this particular field setting. In terms of the method, I use a case case study method with qualitative tools, where I explore an existing traditional irrigation practice of water conservation. This particular field site that I've chosen is Keshwavandapuram village in Garlandi Mandal in Anantapur district, Andhra Pradesh. Now, in this particular field site, agriculture is one of the primary sources of livelihood for the people of Anantapur, and farmers follow a two-crop system. However, it is also one of the most water-stressed regions in India. The situation has only worsened in the recent past. In such a place where agriculture holds great significance but rains fail frequently, irrigation becomes very important. Therefore, there are several irrigation projects in the area, both major and minor. However, these projects have only reached a maximum capacity of one-third over the past decade, and the availability of water is erratic. In 2019, the administration declared all mandals, which is an administrative boundary, in Anantapur, our field site, as drought affected. The existence of an alternative irrigation practice in this context is noteworthy. The village of Keshwapuram has an alternative irrigation system that we will be studying called the Gonchi. Now, in the study, I conducted the study in two phases. In the first phase, which was from September 2018 to Jan 2019, we sought to establish the dominant discourse on irrigation in the region by analyzing articles from the local vernacular newspaper on irrigation and by interviewing the government officials in the irrigation department and the revenue department at the district and the mandal level, as well as the village panchayat members. To establish a counter narrative on the alternative irrigation practice, we conducted open-ended interviews with all Gonchi committee members and heads of household who used the Gonchi in the second phase of the fieldwork. A PRA was also conducted and focus group discussions were also conducted. Now, when we actually look at the discourse analysis that we did of 394 translated Telugu articles that were published in the Anantapur edition of the newspaper from 1st Jan to 31st December 2018, we find that irrigation and water were a common theme in the newspaper, redundantly so, with at least one article every day. The most frequent subject in this article are of four types: articles that support the ruling party, articles on water release, articles on demand for water release by the opposition, and individual stories about water from farmers. To illustrate, you can see these quotes on the slide. The first quote talks about how the chief minister makes history by actually bringing water to this lake. Another one, the NABARD, which is one of the main agricultural funding organizations in India, gives funds to a lift irrigation project, which is a major irrigation project, and figures of water levels are mentioned consistently. The third quote is about the opposition at that point of time, the YRS Congress party, talking to farmers unions, talking of how they could help the Bengal gram is what is grown there, farmers, and demanding that the government provide support to farmers who have lost their crop due to a lack of rain. When we look at, these are just illustrated, but they kind of capture what is actually being said. But when we actually look at these 394 articles that we analyzed using a content analysis, we find that drought and a lack of rain is also an ubiquitous refrain. The severity of drought conditions in Anantapur and the fact that water is a highly contested and political issue is visible in this discourse. We see that the mainstream discourse constructs a picture of irrigation that favors the political elite and ensures that the development paradigm of big infrastructural projects to provide water is seen as a panacea to the woes of the people is never really questioned. And we can see this in terms of the themes that actually keep appearing in terms of water being politicized, resentment due to a lack of water, conflicts and protest, and drought and scarcity. Now, when we interviewed the state officials at the district, mandal, and village level, a couple of quotes are on the screen that are illustrative of the interviews conducted. The assistant district executive engineer talks of water not being available at 8,800 feet and even at 1,000 feet. The other a revenue officer talks of no waters in tanks now to even supply farmers. In fact, he even talks about how drinking water is a problem. The panchayat secretary, which is at the lower level, talks of this is the local level of administration, talks of excessive use of bore wells and sand mining that has led to a decrease in availability of water. You have an even more junior officer who even then talks about how we could make it more green. However, this is not happening because there's no water again. Now, if we look at the other side, now that is the dominant discourse. If we look at the alternative practice, the Gonchi itself, we find that the Gonchi basically is this is a picture that is taken from the field site. The Gonchi basically has two meanings, right? It's a traditional irrigation system, and the Gonchi also refers to the committee that manages this traditional irrigation system. Now, when we interviewed the small farmers who are participants of this irrigation system, they say that this system has been in existence for 400 years, and this was a number that was brought up even by the officials. Now, the principal source of water for the Gonchi is a spring, and the physical Gonchi irrigation system consists of 4 stages. The first one is the Talipiri, which is what you see in the picture before you, which is a deep trench in the shape of a basin that is dug in the bed of a river or a stream. Now, during the rainy season, water is collected in the Talipiri and then flows to the seepage channels. So even when there's no water in the river, groundwater collects in the Talipiri and continues to feed this channel till about March. Now, the second stage is this main canal, and this main canal carries water from the Talipiri towards the lands that is irrigated. The third stage, which is towards your left, is a network of distribution channels, and the fourth stage is a trench that actually leads to the individual farmer's land. Now, the Gonchi, as I said, is not just the physical irrigation structure, but also the committee that manages it. Now, the two meanings of the Gonchi are very significant. The resource on which the physical structure of the Gonchi is dependent on, groundwater and surface water, is in great distress. This leads to a failure of the system at times to act as an alternative irrigation mechanism. However, the collective identity of the Gonchi as a committee that represents the people, as well as its legacy as part of the history of the region, gives it a life beyond its mere physical structure. The Gonchi therefore provides social support to farmers in a region that is facing continuous drought and a loss of livelihood. The traditional system of the Ganchi is unable to provide alternative sources of water as there's no water to be had, but what it does is provide for a space for political articulation and concerns and the ability to function collectively for small farmers. However, when we talk about what is preferred or what is recognized by the by the bureaucracy, they recognize the Gonchi, but they prefer more formal structures like the Water User Association that gets funding from the World Bank and JICA and also has the backing of a law. However, when we talk to the farmers themselves, the reason why they prefer the Gonchi to something like the Water User Association is one that they identify with it by saying that this is or has a history that is 400 years old. Further, when they have to participate in the Gonchi, it becomes quite easy because it's not based on economic criteria. According to the farmers, the advantage that the Gonchi has is that there's no capital required to operate this irrigation system. The labor to maintain the system is sourced from amongst its members, and social pressure ensures that the Gonchi continues to operate. There is an acknowledgement that this system is an alternative to other systems that operate more on an economic per pay in. The idea that the individual is not at the heart of the structure, but rather the community, is what truly sets this system apart. And the most telling quote is the one that I have on my screen, where a Gonchi committee member states that Gonchi is a family of 200 members. So therefore, the idea of an alternative is not one that just provides a choice in terms of providing a service of irrigation, but also one that provides the ability of people to collectivize. However, one thing we have to note that this particular system is also riddled with a lot of social hierarchies. The membership to the Gonchi is based on land ownership, and this reflects both caste and gender hierarchy, and discrimination exists within the villagers of Keshavapuram on both of these lines. Also, we do not have any recognition of tenants and seasonal agricultural workers in this particular system. To conclude, we basically tend to we have three narratives here. One is of the newspaper analysis. The second is about from the bureaucracy in terms of how they perceive the Gonchi and irrigation. And the third is by the people of the village themselves. From these narratives, we see that the conclusion is not simple. On one hand, we have a traditional irrigation system that is an alternative to mainstream irrigation practices. It enables politicization and representation of local people, therefore empowers them. But on the other hand, the system is riddled with hierarchies that characterize life in India. Discrimination on grounds of gender, caste, and class exist. The entire system exists on a resource that is facing a severe water crisis. The resource on which the Gonchi runs, the groundwater, is disappearing. How long can a system run if the resource itself no longer exists? From this study, my answer would be that the alternative system of this kind are not just physical manifestations providing a particular service, but instead serve a bigger purpose of collectivization and providing a platform for participation that allow people to build on knowledge that they have accumulated over generations to face a crisis that exists today. It gives people collective strength and a better chance at finding a solution. So thank you. And my questions are these. What is missing in this? Is the narrative cohesive? And if you've noticed, I haven't yet been able to take it forward theoretically. What would your suggestions be for me to do this?
Very, very well done, Lavanya. That was fascinating. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to weigh in. So yeah, we have great job on timing, about 15 minutes to do so. So I think I'll just ask if any students would like to go first. Otherwise, Jess, we're okay today. Okay, Jess, feel free. And then let me know, both online and in the room, and I'll keep with you.
So Lavanya, this is really interesting. And I spent some time actually not too far from this region in India. So it was really wonderful to see some of your photos. I think my question is kind of twofold, and they're related, and I think also hopefully related to your questions at the end, which is your sort of abstract and summary of this project is really fascinating and sort of about the sort of intersectionality of different types and forms of organization. And this is really interesting and I think important and I do think that there's a good place for sort of using polycentricity as a framework to think about this. My question is that the way that you're sort of the methodologies that you're using are really about sort of perceptions of these institutions, both at the local and bureaucratic level. Now, these are really, really important, but I think it seems like one direction you could go that would really allow you to build out a theoretical side is to think about is to really be clear about what are the actual rights that each level of organization holds, and how then are the perceptions that you have already measured and investigated and understood through these narratives, how do they map onto those actual rights and powers of different organizations, and to what extent are there overlaps? Because I think that could really help really integrate a sort of theoretical perspective by thinking about how do these organizations really overlap in their actual powers versus how they're sort of perceived in this narrative that you've really built. That's really a nice and nuanced understanding. But I think that's where sort of you could then insert, okay, so what do we know about how polycentricity what it should say about this and how we should understand it? That seems like it could be a really nice next step. And I would imagine you probably already have that information and data to do that.
Thank you so much. I do have that data, but the thing is, they are from the meetings of the Gonchi and their records that I have it from. The problem that I was having is, so when I sent this paper out to Hardni, she had said, why don't you engage with the crowding out idea? But I was unable to actually see how this narrative fits with Ostrom's idea of crowding out. So I went back to polycentricity. My biggest problem here is when you think of the Water User Association and say the Gonchi, if I were to, and the Panchayat, and if I were to juxtapose these three organizations with each other, it's not like the Gonchi is being a resource that is comparable to say what the Water User Association is doing or what the minor irrigation projects that the Panchayat is in charge of. And that's where this idea of scale got me really confused. So I was wondering, can I even use polycentricity in this? I will definitely do what you told me to. I'll list the access rights and I'll look at it, how that actually works with the perception. But could you maybe help me with this as well?
If I could just add one more point, and then it seems like you have this really wonderful opportunity then to sort of say, okay, even if the Gonchi don't have the sort of similar kinds of formal levels of organization, which is what it sounds like you're saying with respect to comparing it to the Panchayat, for example, right? Thinking about it as an informal institution and the extent to which that confers rights and what kinds of power the Gonchi actually do have, right? Even in this informal context, and how does that butt up against the sort of formal organizations that they interact with? And I do think that that is part of a nuanced understanding of thinking in a polycentric way. So I think that you still have that opportunity there. In fact, a really interesting contribution to think about the sort of way in which informal institutions still allow for these kinds of intersectional and multi-level governance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jess. That was stellar. It looks like Brian's next.
Okay. Very interesting case and issues to be looking at, particularly the kind of groundwater aspects, which I happen to also be doing some stuff related to. In terms of what's kind of missing or what could be added, you seem to be suggesting that Gonchi did provide a basis for people to work together collectively. So something more on how that happens and how it compares with what happens when people are organized in more formal ways. And at least for me, the question of, why the disjunction, as opposed to local people being able to use their, existing practices for collective action and somehow, find a way to, make the formal system function for them, as opposed to, it sounded, you're talking as if it's something separate, kind of often parallel and neglected. And so it's interesting in terms of, okay, to what extent do policies and projects not offer space, not have the potential, and you're looking at one specific case, but I mean, there certainly in other parts of Andhra Pradesh and India, there are all kinds of programs which have tried, including very, I think, sincere, serious NGOs trying to work with communities and trying to draw on local knowledge and customs and practices. And I guess the other thing that I think would make it interesting is the ability to take a kind of nuanced look, in terms of what's brought up in terms of inequalities in power, caste, class, and these things. And yes, they're there. Yes, they're the kind of exclusion of tenants and workers you're talking about, and I'm very clear to acknowledge those. But within that context, and given the imperfection of institutions, are there ways in which it is still enabling cooperation across these different, social distinctions and boundaries and the tensions in terms of to what extent are leaders, quote, capturing, doing things for their own personal benefit, or to what extent are leaders, the reverse question, captured social institutions are strong enough to offer checks and balances. So those seem like some interesting things, but that's just kind of a response off the top of my head. So wish you luck with it.
Thank you so much. May I just respond and ask for your comments on one thing? So as you know, since you all are familiar with this field, Andhra Pradesh has a very, very long history of water users associations. You have organizations like VASAN who have been very active in the watershed management in this place. And you're right, they have collectivized committees around this, right? So in that sense, that entire politics is something that has been well articulated and is part of my literature review, but I'm wondering whether it would add to this paper to bring in that idea, or would it take away from what I already tend. One comment I've got is I have too much. I'm saying too much in this. So is this something that I should engage with or shouldn't, is one question. The second is, you're right, I have instances of how they organize. For example, the Gunchi, mainly in sand mining and bore wells, when they actually wanted to move against people who were actually doing sand mining in the Talipiri, how they collectivized and got the collector who's the district administrator in that sense, to come and actually address that issue. There's another instance of patrolling in which they were able to stop encroachment. So these are at the micro level, right? And you don't have this in the Water User Association, because the people in the Water User Association tend not to be so interested in the local level issues. They're more interested in the in the issues at a higher scale. And in my case, the Water User Association was almost like a dummy organization, which had people who were selected by the revenue department rather from within the community, right? So I think I can bring this in the second part. So thank you. I will definitely do that. But the first part, how do I not make a mess of this whole thing? How do I contextualize it in this history?
I mean, part of it is the questions you want to ask, and that's kind of, the challenge and the opportunity for you, just as someone who, some limited knowledge. Again, these questions given, okay, yes, once again, you can see a bunch, something that maybe a bunch of people who are selected from outside and fall short of democratic accountability. And the, whether you see something as some, your concept of what would be a alternative approach and what would that mean, especially something that makes meaningful differences for the lives of people involved. And again, the kind of opportunity and frustration if this is not happening, even again, as you're talking in a context in which you have lots of NGOs very sincerely tried to do things, in which you have efforts to use Panchayate Raj institutions of local government and make those meaningful. You do have political contestation between different parties, including parties very much concerned about and drawing support from those who are less advantaged. So, I mean, you can argue that none of that's working and you just want to look at people who want to go off in some other direction, and okay, that's a choice. And, as there's a whole history of different views on these issues. And personally, I have my biases of much more, trying to engage with reform and are there ways to make the system work? Well, being aware of all the limitations. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. And yeah, Gustavo, please. And I think Lavanya, you saw Anahi's great comment there in the chat too. So yeah, Gustavo.
Just a very brief comment, thoughts, question. So to what extent you are really sure that it's not working? So because I think we observe complaints about issues and outcomes in pretty much every areas in which are the performance. Then when you measure the performance, somehow you find decent performance, and in areas in which when you measure things, you end up with very low performance. So are you 100% sure that essentially the outcomes are that bad?
If you're talking about caste and gender exclusion, yes, this region is one which has in terms of land reforms, the land reforms have failed. You have most of the land still within the hands of the upper caste and the dominant caste in this particular area, and women aren't even recognized as farmers, even though 70% of the labor is done by women. Agricultural labor is done by women, and more, in fact, in this region. However, in terms of being even recognized as a part of the Gonchi committee, there was this a quote that I have in my paper where one of the Gonchi members says, what will she do if she comes? resources. This is a widow whose husband passed away, and she gets ownership of this land. She should be a part of the Gunchi, but she's never invited, and they just say, what would she say? What would she have to say? And you have such very, very blatant statements of so yeah, so it is quite so is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about the resource itself?
No,
In
I'm
terms of
talking about the resource essentially, not about the gender part, the resource, so essentially. But with the gender part, you can also consider it. So what's your point of reference? I'm sure that if the point of reference is urban areas, of course, but maybe if the point of reference is like, well, we are talking about rural areas in which gender discrimination is widespread, is this a particular outrageous case, or this is just within the norm, essentially? Because if it's within the norm, it's kind of, I don't know, it's what are you trying to move is something much bigger than a local norm.
I understand what you're saying, but I never think that any injustice of any kind could be considered as a norm and should ever be considered as a norm. And I think always bringing out any forms of caste, class, and gender discrimination is something that we always should do, regardless of how normalized it is in the field setting. And my point of reference is, does this work as an alternative system if alternative is defined as something that is decentralized, makes part of the people, enables a more equitable distribution of the resource and justice in the sense, right? So that's my point of reference. But in terms of whether the Gonchi operates as a small irrigation, as a minor irrigation system, and actually provides water to the people, given that I don't have longitudinal data, I just have remembered history and narratives. So from the narrative, it did. But over the past 3 years, because this particular area was drought affected, it wasn't able to. There was no water to be had in the springs, in the groundwater, for even water to be provided, let alone by a small system of this kind, but also within the large irrigation projects. So at the point of time that I am doing this study, yes, it has failed.
Really, really interesting.
But does that mean it's, pardon?
Oh, no, sorry. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock as well. But just really briefly, just two quick things from my end. One, I did some research and a little bit of field work a long time ago, looking at the role of local adalats, so these kind of people's courts as part of the judicial reform movement. And I was wondering if those have been deployed or very useful in resolving any of these disputes in your experience. And my other quick comment is there's a lot of folks interested in water governance, as you know, across the Ostrom community. And we don't currently have a working group on water governance. So, Brian, Bill, we have a variety of folks, including at UC Davis, who are very keen on it. So if that's of interest following this, just let us know and we can put our heads together and do and start a group. We can help with that. So any comments though on the Luck Adalats?
I would be very, very happy to be part of such a group. It would really help me a lot. So thank you for that. The local Dalit is not really very effective on the ground. It's something that is only on paper, nowhere else.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I looked. This was like 2008 when I was there looking into it. So I have not followed. That's a shame. But such important work. Thank you so much, Lavanya, for giving us a chance to help highlight it. And hopefully this will start a series of conversations. Brian had another good chat there as well. So, but yeah, let's be in touch about the water governance working group too. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes, please. Fantastic. Sorry, we're packing so much in. Next, though, we're going to be turning to Anahi. So let me pull up your, Anahi, Professor Anahi Ocampo Melgar at the University of Chile, Department of Forestry, Management, and its Environment. She'll be presenting on context, collaboration, and adaptive capacity in water users organizations in Chile. So continuing the water theme, Anahi, which is lovely. So thank you again, Lavanya, that was terrific. And Anahi, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Can you see the screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I am very nervous to present after Lavanya because my manuscript is really in diapers, and I joined I joined the Ostrom summer school precisely because I really have no background in the methodologies, so I'm a little bit lost. And this is an article that I started to draft while in the summer course, and I have been trying to move it forward, but it has been difficult. So I'm just in the methods part. Hopefully you could give me some insight and see if I'm going in the right track. Well, this is a manuscript that will be part of the second year of a research project that it's named Unraveling Sustainable Adaptive Capacity in Water Users Organization in Central Chile. Just to understand the project in general, and then the small part that's coming from this is in Chile you have water users organizations not at the basin level, but sometimes it's just sections of the river, and management is based on a very private and market system that has enormous critiques, but it is what it's working. And on top of that, the last 10 years or 12 years so far, we have been experiencing less than 40 or 50% average in rainfall, in annual rainfall, due to a mega drought event that has been affecting all Chile, but mostly the central regions where most of the agrarian activity is located. So my interest in this was to understand what are water users organizations doing about it, and understand besides the critiques on the water code, which is part of I'm analyzing, but besides that, what are they doing as a group in collective actions? So that's why I ended up joining groups in collaborative governance and reading about Elinor Ostrom theory, because I realized that everything was connected. So the research project was aiming at understanding adaptation, decision making in 4 organizations, and trying to discover patterns that could be helpful to potentially replicate in other groups, and also maybe change or let's see what they are doing, right? Because so far they're just a group of people making decisions in the ground. So when I started this project from the literature on adaptive capacity, which has according to a latest reference, it's a very disaggregated line of work. A lot of people is talking about it and in different disciplines, and nobody is, it's a very low cross citation, how to say. So and in very different ways of how to understand what is adaptive capacity. So it could be either the adaptation itself, it could be the coping capacity, it could be the ability to change coping capacity, or resilience. But I'm gonna show you what are the things that I'm sort of exploring. But the project itself is a 3 years project, and that the first year I interview key decision makers, leaders in 4 water users organizations, and trying to understand key elements of adaptive capacity and what they have been doing during this last 15 years, including the 10-12 years of the less rain than average rainfall. In a second year, what we did is to select 2 of the most interesting cases in order to start comparing and starting to really understand what's behind those adaptive capacities that they are mentioning as existing or lacking. And in the 3rd year, that would be the next year, I want to go deeper into a historical digging into the history and also into the narrative to understand what changes in policies could have helped some of these elements of adaptive capacity to be there or not. Okay. So even though that I started with 4 groups, all of them in central Chile, for this organization and I'm sorry, for this article and for the 2nd year of my project, I have been mostly working with the 2 surveillance boards, which are large or the larger type of organization, including individual water users, but also representatives of other smaller organizations that are called channel association and other type of smaller organizations called water communities. All of them are they are not mandatory, they're voluntarily suggested to join this surveillance board. And the surveillance board is the one in charge of making sure that waters it's being distributed according to legal shares, and if there is less water flow in the river channel, then they are the ones supposed to decide, of course, with the participation of all leaders, decide how much water is going to receive each user. The interesting thing about these 2 organizations is that one of them is has definitely shown that it was more prepared to face the drought than the other one. So we are digging into that right now. We're digging into what could be the context that has resulted in this difference, right? So again, I have some information from the 1st year that it's from the interviews, that it's the historical description of what has happened, especially in the 2019, that it was the driest year of the 10 years mega drought. And I have a selection of key elements that help facing drought in both groups and a general understanding of the outcomes. We also run type of a not focus group, but we did a participatory workshop in order to understand how they prioritize these elements. And in the 2nd year, I'm trying to understand how the social ecological context has influenced different patterns of adaptive capacity, starting from the understanding that they are both working under the same governance system, right? That's not different between them, but there are other things that are different. So that's kind of what I'm trying to understand, and then to work towards next year. So in the manuscript, I'm trying to explain how linking adaptive capacity and collaborative management in understanding context is linking theory, so it's linking disciplines too, because there's a lot of overlap in what these 2 literatures discuss, and I think that's very interesting for me, because what I'm trying to understand is how group people react, right, to how are they going to react or in the face of increasing climate change challenges. So this is what I have been working the last months or so since the summer school ended. I found that the combined IID and SAS framework was very interesting for me in order to link contextual factors with patterns of interactions in a temporal sequence, that it was kind of what I was looking for, like understanding what was before the beginning of the drought and what happened after the worst year of the drought, 2019, and what's happening now. So I have kind of that understanding. And so I started with 32 elements of adaptive capacity that comes from a reference that's Sinner et al. However, for this particular manuscript, what we did is that we selected the elements that have been coming up as the most important ones, and they are kind of highlighted here. No, they are 10 or 12, I don't remember. And so what I have done is that I'm trying to cross-tabulate those adaptive capacity elements with the second-tier variables that we found out that are different between these two surveillance boards, or these two water users organizations. So what I'm trying to say is that, okay, these are the things that we know that are different in the context, in the social ecological context. So they may have played a role in how these two organizations react. So how can they, at the same time, how that resulted in an element of adaptive capacity showing or not showing, or how do you say, supporting or hindering the implementation of these things. So for example, if we discuss, for example, what were the pre-existing conditions in terms of human constructed facilities, which is a second-tier variable in the CIS framework, it's also an important element of adaptive capacity that we have been exploring in our study. The same with resource units and actors. Actors is one of the, as you saw, one of the most important things that are different between the two organizations. Things like, for example, the history of past experience, that it's very closely related to social memory. That is an element of adaptive capacity. We have found out that that was key in some of the decisions were made. Or leadership, definitely leadership is coming up like a very important element of adaptive capacity, and it's also an element in the social and ecological framework and the CIS framework. And then here in the pattern of interactions, we also have some of the elements that we understand they are adjacent action situations. I'm not sure. And they are also linked with elements of adaptive capacity that may have changed during the drought event. Like, for example, looking for financial funds, or this one is incorrect, I'm sorry. This is learning, integration of more information, networking with the universities and other larger organizations, and monitoring and enforcement. Those are the things that we are going to be able to probably to see a change from the pre-existing conditions. So as you can see, I'm really in diapers here. I want to thank the opportunity to be in this, to present into this very important group and ask very silly questions such as, am I going in the right track? Is this a framework being used appropriately? Is this going to be, I don't know. I'm a little bit still lost about what an action situation and adjacent action situation, especially since drought is an action situation, it's in itself, but at the same time there are different action situations like the monitoring, investment, that we are also trying to understand. So hopefully we are understanding the method. That's it. Wow.
Really well done, Anahi. I think it's out of diapers. I think it's toddling, if not soon to be sprinting. So that's fantastic work. Who'd like to kick us off with some comments for Anahi?
Oh, so I'm not presenting anymore, right?
Oh yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah, Lavanya, I just saw your chat there. Did you want to expand on that at all?
It's so interesting to see different ways in which we're addressing the idea of scarcity. The fact that you're looking at it in terms of adaptive capacity, and you're also looking at institutions of local institutions in terms of saying this. I just thought that was really interesting how we're coming at this from two different points, but still talking about the same thing.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Thank
Absolutely.
I have maybe a clarifying question.
Yeah, let's
I don't know
do
if-
it. Let's do it, Gustavo. Then we'll turn to, yep.
So it's just more of a clarification question. So it's you talk about formal rules, okay, to divide the water, but it was not clear to me exactly what were those formal rules. So for me, it would be very different if we are talking about some general rules that give a lot of room for maneuver for these communities to manage, versus they're already establishing shares. And then essentially pretty much the only thing that the communities can do is to monitor those legal shares. So those could be very different environments, no?
Mm-hmm. Well, part of the things that we are learning is that there are formal rules that tells you that you have to proportionately divide water in according to water shares, but in the middle of the crisis, these organizations are making other type of decisions, sometimes to avoid conflict or to help the more vulnerable, for example. That's not something that they're going to confess out loud because it's illegal, but so one of the things that we would like to see if there is a difference between these two organizations, the one that was more used to have drought events because it's a more arid region, and therefore there is more cohesion, something that I cannot really easily measure because it's one of the things that it's mentioned a lot, but how you measure that. And the other one that went into had more conflicts because of the latest drought, because they had more water resources. So this is one of the first or second challenges in their history as an organization. In the adaptive capacity elements related to sanctions, I hope to be able to capture the enactment or the application of informal versus formal rules. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So they're legal shares that are so proportional. So they are equal shares for everybody. That's the legal benchmark. Okay?
No,
So maybe it's something that you find interesting, but people that knows more about water management can tell you more. But I have back of my mind coming this idea that even for when there were informal rules managed, so you are managing the resource through informal rules, you are also coming to these equal shares. So maybe the legal rules are not that important. So you would come to similar outcomes even without the legal rules, but you want deviations when the draw comes. And there comes the problems, essentially, how you deviate exactly from that equal share to everybody rule that you have in normal times, essentially.
Yes, definitely.
So maybe what people wrote about cases in which you don't have such strong legal rules, it's still useful for your case, because the legal rule is kind of capturing something very similar to or they agree informally. Okay? So
Mhm.
again, I can be wrong. I'm not an expert on water governance, but my feeling is that Eleanor Ostrom was finding that in many cases they were kind of bargaining, and then the outcome of this bargaining was kind of some kind of equal share. Okay, so it's something like that.
I know where you're going, and it's very difficult for me to explain because the Chilean water code is such a complex topic for me. The thing is that it's not equal share, is how many shares you have, then the proportion of water, it's according to your share. How many shares you have is not necessarily linked to what you're producing and how much water resource demand you have. So let me see.
So they're water rights. That's what you're saying. So
they're
they're
water rights. Water rights, yes,
Okay,
private.
that's a different animal. Okay, so
Yes.
they're water rights, and then the key question is: can you trade those water rights? Can you sell those water rights or not? Or what are the restrictions to trading those water rights?
Exactly. So if you have, this is what I'm trying to explain in the manuscript. I'm just kind of, it's my theory.
I see.
If you have an organization it's really cohesive, that has a leadership that's prepared to adapt, in order to avoid conflicts meaning, okay, I have less water shares, private water shares, I'm going to be more impacted by this drought, they will find a way of doing something informal, illegal, to keep everybody in peace, let's say. Like, for example, we know that this owner is going to have a rough time. Let's give it more water than his water shares are the legal water shares, right? Mm-hmm. In another type of organization, that's impossible. Those type of discussions are impossible. They can end up in a court of law, because that's something that is not, it's illegal, right? This is my private water shares, my I forgot the name, therefore you're stealing from me. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to say is that collective action towards adaptation, that's kind of another paper we're working on. So the flexibility of the legal system, it's a problem, right? They're not allowed to do some of the things that should be allowed if adaptation capacity was being promoted, right? So even though those things are happening, in order to have everybody in peace and helping each other. See?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I have a follow? Sorry, there's a conversation.
A few minutes left. So how about, here's my suggestion. First off, Anahi, can you stay after 1 o'clock to continue chatting a little bit, or do you have to run?
We can do that. Yep.
I can stay a few minutes. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry, but so how about we do a quick lightning round though? I'm sorry to cut that off just a little bit, Gustavo, because it's fascinating. Oh, it's great. No, Brian, and then Maija, please, if you'd like to both interject, and then Anahi, Julio had a point there as well in the chat. Brian, please.
Okay, very quickly, and I'm happy to talk more afterwards. I think as a comment suggestion, the paper could benefit by bringing out what you talked about before. What are they doing as a group? Bring out the people, not just these abstractions, which are actually just tools to help understand what may be going on. The key thing is what the people are doing, and that's what I think some of what you're talking about in response to Gustavo is very interesting, because people actually do find ways to change the rules. And the Western US, I just finished reading Lynn's PhD dissertation, which is fascinating. People found ways to basically change what seemed to be very hard and fast legal rules. And then within that context, you can look at, okay, which of these contextual factors make a difference? That, okay, their big differences is storage, but you're suggesting maybe it's this social memory, social capital or something that's more important than the physical part. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, be happy to talk more later.
Thank you, Brian. Yes.
That's excellent, Brian. and couldn't be more front of mind given what's happening in the West right now. Maisha, please.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. So I just wanted to ask one thing about these two different organizations. That did they face like a different level of water scarcity? So I think actually in between you kind of did I hear that you already mentioned something like that the one that had more water resources actually had more conflict than and the other way around, the one where there was more scarcity actually was more cooperative. Is that the case?
Correctly, yes. What we have found is especially the 2019 drought caused much more crisis in one of the organizations than the other, and the way they explain the situation, it's definitely they are used to this type of events, and they say in their own words, we already know that if we don't collaborate, we don't we'll go out of this situation. And the other organizations, they were not used to having less water. So that once they were faced with the drought, they started to point at each other who to blame, right? So that's very interesting. How is that also connected to other things? Like, for example, if you are more used to droughts, then definitely you're going to be investing in other things. Like, for example, they have a larger history of working with academia, like in integrating climate change information in some of the things they do. They have been working with academia, trying to understand what's the role of the glaciers in their hydrology. What else? It's definitely an organization that's been making baby steps into a different type of management, while the other one, even though it's registered to be found 20 years earlier, they really never had to work together to have their water because they had enough water, right? So that's some of the things that we are finding.
Fantastic, Anahi. And I know that we're pretty much out of time. So how about this? Let's thank you again. And you, of course, as well, Lavanya. And then we'll keep this open. Okay. Thank you very much. We are back to the normal format next week. So there'll be one speaker for the research series. So we'll have a lot more time, I think. But Anahi, please.